Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Winfree, and you're about to listen to an old episode of a podcast that I used to host called Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. This particular episode focuses on the Showtime original series Dexter, starring Michael C. Hall, and originally aired on September 12th, 2013. That's very relevant because the finale of the original series of Dexter aired on September 22nd, 2013. Consequently, neither myself nor my guest for this podcast, Say Mercati, have a whole lot to say about the finale because it hadn't happened yet. I assure you, we both had a lot of thoughts about how that show ended, as I'm sure most of you did. But if you're expecting a tearing into that particular finale and why it's one of the worst in television history, you won't find it here because it had not yet aired. Depending on the air date in particular, we might have been 2 episodes away from the finale. Again, somewhat depending on when we recorded this relative to when the individual episodes aired. So, just throwing that out there. This is mostly a discussion about the first 5-ish seasons. We all kind of agree that seasons 6 and 7 are terrible. So we devoted most of the episode to talking about the parts of the show that we enjoyed, funnily enough. This show is being presented here in conjunction with the new Dexter season because that hurricane depositing him in the backcountry of Oregon to become a lumberjack was... Everyone's dunked on that ending forever, for good reason. But we're doing this in conjunction, releasing this one in conjunction with the new series starting up, so for whatever it's worth, you can take a listen to this particular episode. Alright, before we get into the past, let's go ahead and pay a few bills here. First up, we would like to thank the sponsors for the show, Grammarly. For you listeners of the W2M network, you can find Grammarly is offering a free download of the Grammarly software. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Something Dexter could have used a time or two. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes, while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork to download Grammarly for free. There will be a link in the description below if you are so inclined to use that. Also, we are sponsored by Amazon Music. This is getamazonmusic.com/W2Mnetwork. Amazon Music is one of the best streaming music services out there. I don't have any... I would say that even if they weren't supporting the show, the network actually, so get a free 30 days on us. There will be a link in the description again, or getamazonmusic.com/W2Mnetwork. 30 days, free, no fuss, no muss, 70 million individual songs, so many albums. If you like it, it's probably there. Give it a trial. If you like it, keep it. If not, then, well, you lost nothing. It was literally free. So click the link, fill out the description, fill out the little form they give you that lets them know that we're the ones that sent you there. It helps out a lot, so thank you very much. That's always appreciated. And with that, let me throw it to my past self. Past me, take it away.
When the devil is too busy and death a bit too much, they call on me by name, you see, for my special touch. To the gentlemen, I'm misfortune. To the ladies, I'm surprise. But call me by any name, anyway, it's all the same. I'm the fly in your soup, I'm the pebble in your shoe, I'm the bee beneath your bed, I'm the bump on every head, I'm the heel on which you slip, I'm the pin in every head, I'm the thorn in your side, makes you wriggle and writhe, and it's see the devil tips his hat to me. I do it all because I'm evil, and I do it all for free. Your tears are all the pay I'll ever need.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, tears of children or other people, we do accept them as currency here on Everyone Loves a Bad Guy. I am your host, Robert Winfree, and thank you very much for joining us. This is being broadcast live on Friday the 13th. No better way to spend a Friday the 13th than talking bad guys. Well, I suppose being involved in a Friday the 13th movie marathon is a good way to do it as well, but hey, take some time off, listen to us jabber here, and then go back to Jason Voorhees killing people, because that's always a good time. Yes, I did say us. I'm not alone here. I do have a guest, and we are continuing our epic countdown to the finale of Breaking Bad. A couple of weeks from now will be the final episode of that series. We'll all be very sad to see it go. So in honor of that, we are counting down great television characters, good men who make bad choices, or just bad guys who the stories focus around. It's all good. I'm pretty lax about that. This week, the last 3 weeks have been focused on shows done by HBO. We had Oz, The Sopranos, and The Wire, and HBO can't get all of the love. There are other networks with other great shows. We're talking Showtime this week, and we are talking one of my brother's favorite shows, one that I'm rather fond of. We're talking about Michael C. Hall playing Dexter and the various world that he lives in down in Miami. A lot of good times to be had there. And as mentioned before, I'm not here alone. My guest at this time, he was here before when we talked about evil animals. Very insightful. You can check out his work on 411mania.com. Everybody help me welcome back Samer Kadi. Samer, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Robert. I'm glad to be back.
Hey, always glad to have you or anyone else who wants to be on this show. Doing it solo is kind of a pain. I have to find other clips and download them. And having someone else talk helps fill the time and makes my life exponentially. Now, we talked a bit about this before we went on the air, but you are a fairly substantial Dexter fan. In fact, when I let everyone know that I was doing this countdown to Breaking Bad, I was given two pieces of advice that seemed to resonate. They said you have to have Mark Radulich on to talk about The Wire, and you have to have Samer Kadi on to talk about Dexter. Well, I fulfilled half of that. I had Mark Radulich on, and we talked about The Wire. Now I've got you here, and I want to talk about Dexter. So just kind of start us off with your introduction to the series and your thoughts on the main character, since that's as good a place to start as any. The interesting, borderline highly sociopathic Dexter Morse.
Yeah, as I said, as I was talking to you off the air, my exposure to television was mainly limited to sports. That's pretty much all I watched. Anything else, movies and whatever, I just used to buy them on DVDs or just go to the movies. I didn't watch much television outside of sport. Late last year, I thought that I'm really caught behind times and doing podcasts with Jeremy Lambert, who's a pop culture guru. I really started finding myself a bit, really from the Stone Ages. That's how I felt. So I figured, I better catch up. I am fascinated by the murder mystery genre. And as I told you off the air, yes, it might sound creepy, but serial killers fascinate me. Used to watch a ton of documentaries, still do, about real-life serial killers. And any movie I can get my hands on that is, along the lines of Seven and Silence of the Lambs and those kind of movies, well, I never missed one. Now, after a while, you run out of good movies to watch, and then you run out of the crap. So I figured I might give Sirius a try, and, Dexter, I've heard a lot of good things about it. I watched it, was blown away by the first season, got hooked after that. Everybody knows the quality of the show hasn't really maintained its lofty standards set up by the first and second seasons, but still, I think the first 4 seasons alone were so good, particularly 1, 2, and 4, that they were enough to amass the show a huge loyal following. That's kind of how I started with. That's kind of how my, if you want to call it, love story with the show started, because I love that show. Really, the first 4 seasons are some of the best television I've ever seen, and the character itself. I mean, it is ballsy to create a main protagonist being a serial killer, and he's supposed to be the quote-unquote hero of the show at the same time. Obviously, that's not an accurate term by any means, but to make him likable and really push the viewer towards liking him from the get-go really was a gamble. And a gamble that paid off big time, to where they really managed to distort your views. I mean, after all, this is a person who's committing heinous acts, no matter the reason. But I feel the whole idea of the code, which Dexter goes by, meaning, only killing people who, quote-unquote, deserve to die, makes it's not a cop-out, I don't think, because it might sound that way, where it's like, all right, so here's our show's main character. He's a serial killer, but oh wait, he only kills people who deserve to die. It's almost like he's a serial killer version of Robin Hood. But as you watch the show develop, and as they explain the reasons behind Dexter's compulsions, and they don't really shy away from explaining that this is a man with an urge to kill. It's not, the code is only a way for him to not control his actions, but at least channel them. And essentially, as Brock Lesnar would say, make chicken salad out of chicken shit. So it's that aspect in particular I found highly fascinating, the way they were able to pull that off initially. And as I said, the quality has not been consistent, but as a character, Dexter Morgan is really, I feel, one of the greatest characters in television history. And the way he's enriched, for lack of a better term, by the other villains that he comes up against, series after season after season, coming up against, the likes of the Ice Truck Killer, the Trinity Killer, obviously, and even somebody like James Stokes, who was one of the few who were initially onto him. It really helps show you the evolution of the character. And obviously there's, the dual life aspect, which is also fascinating, which applies to a lot of serial killers and has many real-life parallels, if you will. So I feel the show is much deeper than many would think, in my opinion. Many meaning people who don't really watch the show religiously.
I agree. There's a lot of interesting stuff that Dexter does, and my opinion of that Harry's code that Dexter lives by, I've kind of maintained the opinion that it's not so much a way. I'm the oldest of four kids. I have three younger brothers. One of them, because I talk with them about what I do here for either whether I'm writing, whether I'm podcasting, we communicate a fair amount. And he said to me, what do you do? You're going to talk about Dexter as a bad guy because, he only kills bad. My initial response was, he only kills bad guys because they're easier to kill and it lets him get away with it for longer. He does not kill them because they deserve to die, in the sense that, the Punisher, for example, goes around killing mob bosses because they're evil people. He has an urge to kill, and he kills people who he feels have escaped, not just he feels have escaped justice, but in some cases he will warp evidence so that he gets the chance to kill them because he needs to kill people. A compulsion he has that he has learned nothing more than how to prolong his ability to do it by killing people that no one's going to care about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important to highlight the fact that he does not have a moral obligation to kill these people, as you just mentioned. And throughout, I think one of the most interesting parts they've been able to establish is, with time, you feel that occasionally some kills for Dexter are more personal than others, and might be driven. And I'm not talking about the quote. Yeah, I'm not talking about the major kills, the season's main villain. Even something like I think, remember Little Chino, for example, in season 2?
Yeah.
That huge Hispanic man who had killed children and whatever. Even actually the opening scene of the very first of the pilot, with Dexter being legitimately angered by a man who had killed children. So they do show you that he has, despite being a complete sociopath or a psychopath, they do show you that he has hints of morality, but ultimately that is not what's really driving him. In fact, throughout the show, Dexter does kill innocent people. There are not many, but he does. Particularly for those, by the way, if you haven't realized already, this podcast is going to be filled with spoilers, but I'm sure people listening are expecting this. After his wife dies, I think he kills a person out of complete rage because he insulted her or something. So, I mean, throughout the shows...
I love that he's planning to leave Miami after the death of his wife, Rita, played by Julie Benn. And he gets in his boat, he's traveling up one of the many canals that inhabit the lower Florida area, and pulls in to get gas, and he comes across this one rude, hillbilly-like guy, and Dexter corners him in the bathroom, and he says, my wife just died, and he responds with, well, I'm really sorry about your fucking wife, and he just goes on a brief profanity-laden rant, and Dexter just very calmly leans over, picks up an anchor, a boat anchor from the shelf of this bathroom, and then proceeds to beat the man to death with it. They're in this, dingy backwoods, almost swamp-like boat stop on a canal, and it's also at that point that Harry, James Remar, resurfaces for the first time since, as purely a hallucination in Dexter's mind, but that's when he shows up for the first time after Rita's death, because he's actually grieving a little bit as part of the human process. He was shut down for a while, and then he beats him to death with a very sharp anchor, and he begins to feel emotion. But yeah, it was... The look on his face when he was doing it was just superb acting on the part of Michael C. Hall.
Yeah, I feel, honestly, to me, that is one of the best episodes in the show's history. And everything after that very episode, because that was the first episode of Season 5. And it's generally accepted that Season 5 is when things start going downhill. Everything after that, I feel this episode, that particular scene, is a really highlight of the show, but it's also sort of like a turning point. However, to stick with our topic, part of why that scene is so powerful is that, as you just mentioned, it shows emotions. He killed out of anger, which is something generally not associated with psychopaths. And more than that, they even did it in a way that make you feel sorry for the guy. Not the guy who died, but the guy who killed. It's almost like, it's really, I thought that whole scene was so powerful, but also genius. The way it was written, the way, as you mentioned, the acting was superb. And then his father, obviously, or his projection of his father shows up and tells him, I'm proud of you, because he finally was able to show emotions after his wife's death. So, and I really think it's truly fascinating how each kill is driven and motivated differently. Obviously, for the most part, as we mentioned, he does have an urge to kill, but they managed to separate some kills. For instance, early in first episode of Season 7, where after his sister catches him at the end of Season 6, and finally, essentially he's caught in the act killing the Doomsday Killer in the church, Dexter, a bit dubiously, I might say, but in order to escape all of this, flies down to the airport. Not flies down, he drives down to the airport to kill a guy because it's his only way to deal with stress. Now, watching the show, it might sound a bit absurd, but that's not, obviously the way it was done, it was, kind of unrealistic and over the top, but hey, that's Dexter for you. But it's not really unrealistic in the sense that you're not, it's inaccurate to think that, oh, he's so stupid, why would he kill now? Because take a look at Ted Bundy in real life, for example. Right after he escaped prison for the first time, he went on the biggest killing spree of his life, while essentially he was the most wanted man in the country. Because when they lose control, that's their way of dealing with things. Psychopaths, that is, serial killers. And that's what Dexter did after his wife died. That's what he did after his sister saw him. So I think while obviously they do everything in a Hollywood-esque way, the core idea of what drives him is not that unrealistic, I don't think. He's not this morally driven serial killer at all, but, he lives by a code that he breaks. And at the end of the day, I think when you think about it, going back to the whole villain aspect of Dexter, is that he is an incredibly selfish human being. Incredibly selfish. And the way, I find the way he justifies killing to be, it's highly arbitrary. At times it's the code, other times it isn't. And more than anything else, it's not justice, because in pretty much every single episode of every single season, he solves a murder before the police does, but really does not report it so he could actually get the chance to kill. And I think one of the most famous Dexter villains would be the Ice Truck Killer, and how Dexter was enjoying the thrill. It's not like he was not appalled by whatever this man is doing until later in the season where where things start coming out. But initially, he respected him. He liked him, and that was a horrible man who was killing innocent people. So I feel how he looks at different killers arbitrarily or different murderers arbitrarily is really part of what makes the character so fascinating, but also what makes him a true villain deep down inside, in our traditional sense of the word, is that at the end of the day, this is a despicable human being.
Yeah, he kills people because he feels he needs to kill people. He's driven by the urge to kill people, and he just has he has some guidelines that make it difficult for people to catch him. More than once, for one of the ones that I go back to frequently when I think about this, and you mentioned his selfishness, and my understanding is most sociopaths and psychopaths view the world as revolving around them because no one else is necessarily real. I know there's a bunch of different psychopathies going on within, sociopath or psychopath, or someone who thinks no one else is real but them, but it all kind of jumbles together for the purposes of a discussion like this, at least. And I think it's the beginning of season 4 when he falsifies data, gives a horrible testimony in court, basically lets this man go free just so he can find him and then kill him later. And then he falls asleep at the wheel because he's sleep deprived due to the new baby being home and working all the time. He's basically got life that has kind of smacked him over the head. He's married now, and there's a kid, and stressed, and he's tired all the time, but he still finds time to let this murderer walk free, then chain him up, then take him to a boxing ring, stab him in the chest, dismember him, stick him in his car, then drive too fast while he's drowsy, flip the car several times, and it's a small miracle there was no one else on that road, just in terms of the storyline, because that was the type of accident that kills people, and he managed to, not, and he managed to not be seriously injured in it, but it's just, he doesn't care much. It ruins that detective's career. I think it's Quinn. It's been a while since I've seen that particular episode, but that detective's case is ruined. When you look at how that affects everyone else, the prosecutor's conviction rate goes down, a murderer walks free, this detective now has to deal with figuring out how things went wrong, and it's easy to point at him, but it affects everyone else around him, and he rather blithely screws up their plans and what they're trying to do just because he hasn't killed anyone in a couple of months and he desperately...
Yeah, I think like you, I haven't seen that season in a while. I don't remember whether he deliberately falsified the statement in court or he just happened to bring the wrong file because he wasn't getting much sleep due to his newborn son.
I remember that he did it intentionally.
That's honestly not how I remember it, but that is really, neither here nor there.
He plays it off. He plays it off to everyone else like, I'm just really tired and I just made an honest mistake, but when his internal monologue reveals that he did it on purpose because he had planned beforehand to do that, so he knew who he was going to get off. He knew where he was going to take them to kill them and everything beforehand.
Oh, right. Okay. And I think that was that entire season. It's generally regarded as the best. I consider it the best of the entire series. But that entire season, in addition to, John Lithgow's terrific performance as the Trinity Killer, and the Trinity Killer himself being such a greatly written character, sticking with Dexter himself here for a second, that season was, it's a huge turning point in Dexter, the person even before his wife actually dies. Now he's suddenly a man with a newborn child. And this is when they really start showing the complications of the dual life. Because, and I think that was, the dual life aspect, especially with the family, was a constant theme throughout, because initially when he says, I want to learn from the Trinity Killer, that's really what he had intended. Like, how could this guy really be able to kind of sit at the wheel of two completely different lives, one revolving around murder and, him being the Trinity Killer, and the other being building a family with a wife and 2 kids, I think it was. So, and that's something that it's not, again, most serial killers are loners, but that season is highly based on the BTK killer, and part of the reason why he was such a unique case, he being the BTK killer in real life, is that this is a man who killed across decades, like the Trinity Killer himself, and was only I think his first murder was in 1976, and he was caught in 2004. Like, that's a huge time span. And when
I
he was
actually
caught,
have
the
a
man
book
had...
in that same vein. My dad and my stepmom, both of whom have kind of similar tastes to me, or they understand my taste. So I'm kind of like you. I'm fascinated by the odd and the dark, hence a podcast like this. But they got me a book of unsolved cases, and some generally murders. It's a fascinating read. I've read it a couple of times, but that particular book was published prior to James Rader, the BTK killer, being caught and convicted. And it didn't come out that long ago. I mean, the guy he went dormant for a long time, and there was a bunch of speculation about, maybe he's in jail on an unrelated charge or something. But, yeah, he was successful in terms of being a serial killer for a really long time there were the other example of, intelligent serial killers who haven't been caught, the Zodiac killer, to this day has not definitively been identified.
Right. And part of the reason why the BTK killer is so fascinating, I mean, he did end up getting caught rather foolishly by sending a floppy disk to the cops that they were easily able to trace, right after asking the police if it's able to be traced, and they just said no, and he took their word for it. I mean, this is how arrogant he grew by taunting the police, that he really felt so much in charge that he just took their word for it, which was foolish. But part of the reason why he was able to not get caught for so long, and this is why the case of the BTK killer is so fascinating, is that the man, for somebody who killed throughout 4 different decades, or at least was on the loose throughout 4 different decades, he really did not kill that often. Unlike many serial killers, he was able to control his urges and his compulsions. I think on the whole he committed, help me out here, what was it, 9 murders? Maybe.
Give me a second, I'll find out.
I'm sure it was more than 9 people that died, but I doubt there were more than 9 different murders, which is not a substantial amount for somebody, again, who killed
10
murders.
People.
All right.
10 people.
Well, 10 people. Okay, so, I mean, he was able to control his urges. In fact, after they caught him, they found drawings of, the man was obsessed with bondage in general. BTK stands for bind, torture, kill, for those who don't know. So anyway, the man was able to control...
I apologize.
Oh, yeah, I did correct you while you were speaking. Anyway, no, that's fine. So the man was able to, quote-unquote, get off on pictures. He would, clip different photos from magazines and draw bondage around a woman's neck or hands or wrists. That's how he was able to control his urges. More than that, he would actually bind himself and take pictures of himself in a grave. Obviously this is a twisted man. But the point is, because of his family life, tying that back to Dexter and season 4 of Dexter, because of his family life, this was not somebody who could go out every night and kill. So, that 4th season, that's what was so great about it, is that, ever since season 1, there was the whole duality of Dexter trying to mask his real identity, but at least he was living alone in his own apartment, so things were different. But all of a sudden now, he's got this family, he lives in a house, he can't go out and kill every night. He has to be extra careful. He has to choose his targets more carefully. So, again, the show, even if it might seem at times like, your typical unrealistic plot, it is obviously it is, but it's based on so many, or at least inspired by so many real-life events. I mean, this is the life of a serial killer in many ways.
Yeah, as close as we're going to get to seeing it portrayed, as far as I know, unless some unscrupulous network executive decides to do a reality show around someone, which, might not be as far off as we'd all like to think. But,
let's
Dexter himself...
hope not.
Let's hope not, yeah. Dexter himself is a very fascinating character. Like you said, one of the greatest in television history. Michael C. Hall's performance, hands down, one of the best from television in the last couple of decades. I mean, for me, the big, 4 or 5 acting performances from the last 10, 20 years are James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano, Bryan Cranston as Walter White, Michael Chiklis as Vic Mackey, dang it, I keep forgetting, Katie Seagal as Jimmer Telemaro, and Michael C. Hall from Dexter. I mean, you've got such a hugely talented group of people there, and he absolutely deserves to be in there. But like you mentioned, they tend to, for those of you unfamiliar with the series, they tend to structure each season with Dexter squaring off with an opponent of some kind, whether it's another... They usually have another serial killer that he is opposite against, but that's not always the primary antagonist. I mean, in Season 3, there's the guy who skins people, but really the whole show is about him and Jimmy Smith, which produced some of the best interaction. I still, to this day, love the interactions between those two on the golf course. It stands as some of my favorite television of all time.
Please tell me you actually loved that season and agreed that, just a quick tangent here, please tell me that you agreed that it's a very underrated season and gets undeserved slack.
I absolutely think that is. I love not just the interactions between Jimmy Smith and, what was his character's name? Miguel something.
Miguel Prado,
yes. But the interactions between Miguel and Dexter are just awesome. I mean, I get such a kick out of watching those two play off of each other. And are there some other holes in it? I mean, it gets some flack because you have the Skinner as, again, the other killer that Dexter's kind of after, and he's a weaker version, but I think that's people missing the point. Really, Jimmy Smith is the guy opposing Dexter throughout almost all of that. I mean,
I think the main problem, for people, I think the problem is that he kills Miguel Prado in the penultimate episode, and then he kills the Skinner in the last one, while for everyone, as you mentioned, Miguel Prado was the main story, so it kind of felt the ending was a bit anticlimactic, especially that for much of the season, the Skinner was really Deborah's opponent, so to speak, more than Dexter.
Dexter was not all that interested in him. He was interested in talking with Miguel, whereas the police were looking for the Skinner, but Dexter himself had very little interest in it, apart from the fact that the Skinner tried to kill him at the end, and that didn't work out too well for him. But trying to kill Dexter never seems to work out well for any. But no, I very much like I prefer the third season to the second, to be perfectly honest. But I freely admit that's also just my personal opinion. I really like the third season a lot. I mean, again, just the interactions between Dexter and Miguel are just, for my money, they're gold. Whether they're humorous or serious. I mean, when Dexter comes out from killing that drug dealer who everyone thinks killed Miguel's brother, it was actually Dexter. But when he comes out and he says, "No, I killed him, he came at me," and Miguel said, "Thank you for killing him, he deserved it, I was going to do it, I'll take care of this for you, let me go see it." And at that point, Dexter said, no, you can't see the fact that I very carefully coated the room in plastic so that there's no blood spatter evidence, and I have a kill suit so that there's no evidence on me. No, just go ahead, I can clean up. And he's, "I'll take care of the rest of this, thank you." And just, the fact that they have the dramatic device of talking in the rain at the same time, but just the interactions between those two, for my money, are just gold. Some of the best interactive television I've almost ever seen. I mean, you get great interactions with different characters in different shows, but the way those two, you have two quality actors with two well-written characters, they get to play off of each other, and it's an absolute joy for me to watch, personally.
Yeah, the rooftop discussion towards the end was also phenomenal. Towards the end, when they actually meet on the rooftop of the police station, Miguel is actually framing him so that the Skinner gets a good look at him, and they have this back and forth where Miguel's super pissed off because remember he had originally given him a shirt with the blood stain that tied him to the Freebo, I think that was his name, that tied him to the Freebo murder, and turns out it's not real, it's animal blood.
Yeah, it was cow's blood or something.
And Dexter, Yeah, it's cow's butt. And Dexter actually breaks into Miguel's house, or maybe he doesn't break, he just knocks and the maid lets him in or something like that. And I don't know, essentially sends him a message through leaving something. I think it was like the dry cleanings number, so Miguel Torres goes, not Torres, God, Miguel Prado goes there and finds his shirt, and so obviously he's super pissed, so he goes to the police station and he demands that Dexter meets him up on the rooftop, and there they have like this intense discussion where that really leads up, it's almost like in pro wrestling terms, almost like the promo leading up to the Go Home paper. So, you know, and it was, Jimmy Smith's performance in particular, as you alluded to, was terrific, and those two had such great chemistry. That scene is on YouTube for everybody. You can check it out. It's in case you really don't remember the details, but I thought it was a phenomenal scene, really. One of the highest points of the season.
I get a kick out of that, and when he's kind of tutoring Miguel in the ways of how to kill people and get away with it. And he decides he can't tell him how he really gets rid of bodies, because then he'd realize, oh wait, you're the Bay Harbor Butcher, which a rather sensationalist name, but that's what everyone knows the serial killer Dexter is. That's what they know him as. So he tells him that, no, what I do is I break into graveyards at night. And
right.
I find a graveyard. It's a great, well, first of all, it's a great way to hide a body. He goes into a graveyard, dumps a body in an open grave, covers it with a few inches of earth, and the next day a casket is lowered onto it, and no one's the wiser. And as he's explaining that to him, I mean, it's very similar to a scene from the movie, I want to say Mr. Parker, but that last name might be wrong. It's a Kevin Costner movie where Kevin Costner plays a serial killer. And
right, Mr. Hold on. No, it's not. It's definitely not Mr. I think it's with an S, Mr. Though not Smith. And I know that it's a great movie, actually. But
I know,
yeah,
I was really impressed with it.
Go on,
I'll look it up.
I'll just Google it.
I got it,
Right.
But where'd it go?
All right. Well, I'll
okay, yeah, keep going. I'll find it.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to in season
Brooks,
3 is when
Mr.
Mr. Brooks. That's what it is, actually.
Yeah.
You're referring to the scene where Miguel actually does kill somebody. I mean, he kills the defense. I think who is she?
Yeah, the defense lawyer.
Defense attorney. Right. Yeah, and buries her in the graveyard because that's what Dexter, quote-unquote, taught him, even though he wasn't. It was just a camouflage to conceal his real identity. So Dexter, in his attempt to look for the body, remembers what he had taught Miguel. So to taunt him, he actually digs up the body. Obviously, this is the unrealistic part because he goes unseen. But hey, I mean, that's what makes it such great TV. He digs up the body out in the open for everybody to see, and it gets reported. And then they have to examine the scene, and Miguel Prado goes there. I thought that was, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely correct. That particular piece of interaction, but the discussion they have right after that is also amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. But we do want to talk about some of the other, we just talked about Miguel Prado. And we should talk about the first one, we already mentioned there's going to be spoilers in this, but Brian Mosier, the ice truck killer from the first season, was a really interesting character, especially since in the first season they were very heavy on kind of the mystery of it. So you get introduced to Brian Mosier's pseudo-life. He killed a doctor who specialized in creating prosthetic limbs and assumed his life so that he could get closer to Dexter because he knows that Dexter is his brother. Dexter has no memory of this at the time. And some of the interactions between those two are, especially for the first season of a show, they're really good stuff. I mean, do you have any favorite memories from that, or yeah,
absolutely.
That's one of my. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll if you go on, but I'll mention that in a second.
I was just going to say, that was kind of a high mark. I mean, I loved the interaction between Jimmy Smits and Dexter, but in terms of having an opponent who could kind of match Dexter in terms of, no, wait, he might actually kill him, or he might get the better of him. I didn't feel that way about Dokes, or I think it was Lila was the girl he was with in season 2.
Oh, yeah, the psycho bitch.
Yeah. I didn't feel that he was ever, in any kind of real threat from any of the interim killers between Brian Mosier and Trinity, John Lithgow. And then I haven't felt that he's been in much danger since, but that's a different story.
Right. As you mentioned, the show's formula in general, there are exceptions, but in general it's that every season has one main villain that Dexter is after throughout the whole season, and the rest is sort of like filler. There are subplots, obviously, and there are other people that Dexter kills, in other episodes, but there's a main villain. In season 1, as you mentioned, it's the ice strip killer. Again, this is going to be spoiler heavy, but you're not aware of that right away. As you mentioned, the great thing about the first season is the mystery. We don't know. I mean, slowly but surely we're introduced to Dexter, his background. We find out more about his past, stuff that he doesn't even remember because he was taken from a murder scene at 2, or maybe he was 2 years old, I think, by his future foster father. So turns out this is, we're really jumping here, but turns out that murder scene was his mother getting killed, and he had a brother in there with him. And that brother turns out to be the ice strip killer who does remember. And in his quest to find Dexter, to find his brother, out of love, not for any malicious intent, he finds out that Dexter is also a serial killer. And this is where the challenge begins. He starts, he sends him cryptic serial killer messages, and it's really amazing. My favorite piece of interactions between the two are the indirect interactions, meaning before they actually met and before he later found out who he really is. My favorite episode of Dexter ever is actually, I think it's the 9th or 10th episode, probably the 9th episode of the first season, called Seeing Red. That's my favorite episode ever, where he kind of assembles all the blood, the ice strip killer assembles all the blood from all the victims he's killed and just dumps them in one room without anything else, no bodies, no nothing. It's just nothing but blood. And Dexter, who throughout the first season, keep in mind, this is the first season, so we haven't seen him really vulnerable at any point. Throughout the first season has been, he almost has this passion for blood. They almost make you feel like he enjoys murder scenes. Obviously, he's a serial killer, so he's not really freaked out. He's not emotionally moved ever by anything. In fact, one of the most common themes of the first season that he always makes sure he mentions is that the fact that he has no feelings. But all of a sudden, he walks into this hotel room and sees just blood all over, and he faints. And because it gives him a flashback. Now, as we later find out, and one of the most powerful scenes of the entire series, towards the end of that episode, the very last scene, Dexter finally decides to walk back into that room, just because he had flashbacks of a little boy crying while covered in blood once he saw that scene in the room. So he finally goes back there and he wants to figure out what happened. So, and it really, all the memories get back to him, and he remembers his mother getting slaughtered with a chainsaw in front of him. He doesn't remember his brother in that particular flashback, and he finds out that this boy is actually him, and that's his mother getting killed right in front of him. So his brother actually just repainted that scene for him. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. To me, that's still, season 1 is not my favorite season, but that was definitely my favorite episode. And it's really, I feel, the episode where they took Dexter, the series, and Dexter, the character, from this fun show, this confident, smart guy, likable guy, into, okay, it's almost like, oh, now it's on. Suddenly you had real emotional investment in the show. Suddenly, for the first time, as you mentioned, you feel vulnerability. And you feel like, okay, this guy, whoever this is a threat, because clearly he knows a thing or two about Dexter, and he knows how to hit him where it hurts. So it's, I thought that was, again, as I mentioned, this is probably my favorite part of the entire show.
Yeah, just for the record, he was 3 when that particular incident happened, and it is episode 10, Seeing Red, from season. And I agree. Those do have some fun, like you said, non-interactions, because Brian Moser, going by the alias Rudy, Dr. Rudy, I forget the last name, because he's dating Deborah Morgan, Dexter's adopted sister at the time, and they have these odd little non-interactions. I mean, when Dexter's trying to recreate the blood spatter spray from that hotel room, that was just, again, this something out of a horror movie, but this series is based more or less in real life, so you have to imagine walking into something that you would only see in a really gory horror movie. And he's trying to recreate the blood spatter pattern, and he's got all these various power tools that he's using to try and recreate it, and he can't quite get it right, and he's going through, which is what blood spatter guys do, and he's going through his list of tools, and Brian walks in, and he says, so, well, what are you doing? And Dexter explains it, and, well, this one doesn't have the right, this one's rotational angle is too small, this one doesn't have enough power, that's fast, and he just says, well, I work with amputees a lot, and I've heard a lot of horror stories, so have you considered maybe a chainsaw? And Dexter kind of brushes him off at the moment, but a bit later he's like, no, wait, that actually works. You have an electric chainsaw, you use an extension cord from out here, and that'll spread it around right. And they just have these really fun interactions between the two of them. I was actually happy when they brought him back in the last season as a new hallucination for Dexter, or his mental projection, however you choose to phrase it.
Yeah, wasn't that in season 5 or something?
I think it was the last season, the current one. I mean, he comes back a little bit here and there in other ones. He's at the beginning of season 2. He pops up briefly.
Right, but there was definitely an episode that was almost completely revolved around him. I think it was in season 5 where Dexter goes somewhere out of town to find Trinity's son, because Trinity's daughter was killed, and he suspects that his son had killed her. So he goes there, and
I think that's in season 5.
I'm sorry?
What you're referencing. I think what you're referencing is season 5.
Yeah, I think it is season 5, and right, and Dexter was having problems with his projection of Harry. I know it sounds ridiculous, so it gets replaced by a projection of Brian, but I don't remember him actually being popping back up in any other season. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but I just don't recall it.
It's not 5. I think it's, I don't know. I know he's in the latest season, season 8. He appeared in the last one briefly in one of these last few episodes, encouraging Dexter to kill Dr. Vogel. But again, okay. I'm happy whenever they get those two back on screen together, even for a brief time, because they had such an interesting dynamic. But moving on to go ahead, make your point.
No, it's one last point about, one thing about the Ice Chuckle and what was so great about that is he genuinely loved Dexter, and his whole thing was actually just a way to reunite with him. So in the end, when Dexter does kill him, it had a strong effect on Dexter himself, and they show you that in the beginning of season 2, where he's a bit rusty. He's unable to kill immediately because, him killing his brother still haunts him. Because he had just met him, true, but suddenly he had somebody he could relate to, somebody who knows who he really is and not just knows that, but accepts him and loves him for it. And that's actually a recurring theme throughout Dexter, where he's searching for somebody who really accepts him for who he is and loves him for that, which is why, he's currently in love with Hannah McKay with the personality of a broomstick.
Yeah, and, when they killed Rita, they took away such a great romantic interest for Dexter. I mean, just because the character of Rita was such an interesting one. She came from that horribly abusive background, but she had developed, he loved Dexter, but she had also developed a spine so that if he was, deceiving her, she didn't know about what, obviously, but she got to the point where she wasn't taking his crap, and he actually reacted to the way she would talk, the way she would respond to him. If she thought he was lying, she'd call him on it, and you get some great marital drama between the two. I mean, if you replace him being a serial killer with him cheating on her, or with it, doing any number of other things that can cause a rift in a marriage, you still have some of the best intermarital dialogue that those two gave each other.
Like him being a drug addict, which I think they did in season 2, where she thought he was a drug addict.
Yeah, that he went
to rehab. Yeah, and because he couldn't tell her, oh no, I'm not a drug addict, I just kill people. He had to admit it, which is, it has a bit of dark humor in it as well.
Yeah, a lot of these shows that we've been talking about lately you get this odd kind of, what you get are just like comedies of errors, where laughing is not necessarily the appropriate response, but it's the only thing you can do given the circumstance.
Right.
I mean, the one that I go back to in Breaking Bad, I think it was the last season 4, was, you have the two associates of Saul's who were trying to get the guy Skylar was sleeping with to pay off the IRS with the money that stole from Walt to give to him, and he doesn't want to do it. So these two, under explicit orders not to harm him in any way, they're intimidating him into paying off the IRS. He tries to run away from them. He trips over an area rug and slides headfirst into the island in his kitchen, and it breaks his neck. He doesn't die, but paralyzed from that point. And I saw that, and I laughed. And it's not appropriate because theoretically, here's a real person who just... I thought he was dead at first, and that was my honest initial response. And it's not funny, but that it's an act of God type thing. You can't help but laugh. It's the only response that comes to mind.
Like when Dexter hits Rita's ex-husband with a frying pan over the head. I laughed.
Yeah.
I genuinely laughed. I honestly thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, here's this guy who kills people as if, like the rest of us shop for groceries. And he doesn't kill him, but he loses control and whacks him over the head with a frying pan.
That was in season 2, right, which is what we're about to discuss. I thought what's really interesting in season 2 is that they went with something. After I watched season 1, I knew that there would come a time where Dexter would become the one haunted by the cops, even if they don't know it's actually Dexter, so he's investigating his own crimes. I really didn't suspect that they'd pull the trigger on it that early into the show's lifespan.
Yeah, it was a little interesting, but the relationship between Dexter and Dokes, I thought, as far as just being antagonistic towards each other, here's a guy who, according to the code that Dexter kills by, he can't kill Dokes because he's not a bad guy. But at the same time, he's just desperately trying to be rid of him because he's figuring out who Dexter is. And
right. And there was conflict between the first 2 rules that Harry taught him, which is don't get caught and don't kill innocent. Well, if he doesn't kill this innocent person, he's gonna get caught because he's on to him. So I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, but we absolutely need to devote at least some time. We've mentioned him before, but John Lithgow's performance as the Trinity Killer in season 4 was just the way I was sold when during some of his facial expressions. I think the first time we see him kill someone when he beats that poor security guard to death with a hammer, and he's wearing a full hazmat suit type getup so that there's no evidence on him, but he's sitting here beating this guy to death with a hammer, and he's sobbing. It's almost like he has no control over himself, and he doesn't actually want to do this, but he has no other choice.
Yeah, that was actually the second time we see him kill somebody. The first time, it's in the very first scene of the entire season where he's in the bathroom naked.
Oh,
that was a pretty sight. But that was a very strong opening scene for that season. I mean, season 3, we just mentioned we both loved it, but as far as emotional impact, it didn't seem to have much. It was highly enjoyable. We just talked about that. But even, Dexter and Miguel's interactions were fun more than anything else. The Skinner, was kind of underwhelming. So the crimes it was never affecting people you really cared about right until he squared off with Dexter towards the end. But then here it is in season 4. Okay, there's this random girl, you don't know who she is, and this random old man, you don't know who he is. But immediately with the score, I thought the music they played for the Trinity was really it had a lasting effect. I feel it was really fitting. It reminds me a bit of Hans Zimmer's theme for the Joker in The Dark Knight. I don't know why, but it had that same effect. Him killing that woman in the bathtub. Right, exactly. And it's not exactly musical. You can't hum it in your head or something. So that's, it's menacing.
It's almost like atonal, just kind of sound that just slowly gets louder and louder and louder as time goes on.
Right, and it's incredibly menacing. And right off the bat, that, okay, and this dude is bad news. And unlike previous seasons, and this is why it's so great, there isn't mystery. You see the killer committing the act. You see his face, unlike any of the previous seasons. So I thought that was interesting. Obviously, as we start finding out more about him throughout the season, yeah, sure. But you immediately see him, and you see him committing the crime. And that was really strong, and it set the tone for what was in my opinion, the best season of the show. I mean, as you just mentioned, John Lithgow's performance was terrific. Initially, him, not just as a serial killer, but as the man. As a serial killer, the crime you mentioned where, he was bludgeoning somebody, I think it was with a hammer, the security guard, and he's really, it's
and then when
almost
he
like
talks
he's
the girl off
crying, and
the ledge.
that was so, that scene, and that dragged, which is, they really took their time with that. In fact, all three of his, because, the reason why he's called Trinity, for those who don't know, that he kills in threes, and that's his MO. He bludgeons a man. A woman gets shoved off a ledge. He actually doesn't shove her. He forces her to jump by threatening to kill her family. So she has to jump because his mother committed suicide when he was young by jumping. And his sister died by accident in the bathtub. So that's why he kills a woman in a bathtub too. So it's such a strong story. It's believable. It is at least convincing. If I don't want to say believable, maybe, but it's definitely convincing. Like his motivation behind it, and more than that, when you initially see him as this, or as Dexter sees him as this perfect family man with the perfect American family, but there's that great. It's probably my other favorite scene of the entire show, that Thanksgiving dinner they're having, when really he reveals his true side, and Dexter loses it and almost chokes him with his belt. I mean, that's some super strong stuff. And talk about great interactions. That season was filled with them. Dexter, I think he just takes an alias, Kyle something, and he approaches Trinity. That's, Kyle Butler. And from there, it was absolutely amazing. Every single, at first, it was almost like this man, Trinity Killer, has become his mentor, Kyle Butler's mentor. But it's all an actor, but deep down inside, Dexter is actually learning, or wants to learn from him, in order to find out how to maintain his family, and takes from him advice as to how to get his kids, or his stepkids in that situation, to find interest, or something like soccer or ballet. I don't remember what it was, but it was really terrific stuff. That season was so robust with, I think it did a terrific job at focusing on the main story first and foremost. The cops were looking for the Trinity. Dexter knew who the Trinity is. So it really, there weren't many distracting subplots or anything, and it all revolved around this man, the Trinity Killer. And as a result, it's really not surprising that most regard him as the greatest Dexter villain, because he's the most fleshed out Dexter villain as well. He's the one you see the most, because they showed him from that initial moment of the season, which allowed some character development. In some ways you feel sorry for him. At one point he wanted to commit suicide only to be saved by Dexter so he could be later killed by Dexter. And that was the paradox there, was really interesting as well. So they really show you all sides of this man, while also showing you different sides of Dexter as well. And obviously the finale was really, breathtaking in a sad way.
To me, the scene of Dexter seeing his son Harrison in a pool of his mother's blood, and that image kind of flashing between that one and his memory of him being in a pool of his mother's blood, and seeing the police officer carry his son out of the room, and again, it's flashing between that and him remembering Harry carrying him out of the cargo container. Just absolutely floored me the first time I watched it. I'm at a loss for words. It's just this great tragedy that
it's chilling.
It is. It's absolutely haunting.
The way they went about that too is because they were playing that uplifting beat towards the end as he's calling his wife, telling her that he'd be joining her on vacation right after he gets done killing the Trinity Killer. And remember then when he was killing him, the Trinity Killer says it's all done, it's over now, or it's done already. Something along those lines. Something
It's already
something
done.
that he had said. Yeah, and he had said that, and you immediately shrug it off because that's what he had told the girl he killed at the very beginning of the season. So you think it's just something he says before killing somebody. But, you know, you have suspicions, but at the same time you don't want to believe it. And they're just playing that uplifting music towards the end that they usually do. And you think, well, you know, that's the usual. You know, he's just going to join his wife on vacation and get over their marital problem. And he calls her cell phone. He hears I think she had left him a voice message or something. Then he calls her on her cell phone. She was supposedly out of town, and it rings in his house, and that's where he enters the bathroom, and as you mentioned, sees his son lying in a pool of blood. I mean, that was really, really, that whole ending sequence was absolutely fantastic. I mean, there was no better way. I mean, it's sad, definitely. It's chilling, it's haunting, but there was no better way to end that season. And, you know, it's on one hand, it's expected that the show would go downhill from there because there was no way you could ever top that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain times in certain seasons and different television series that, you know, okay, this is a high point. You know, it's going to go downhill. It's just kind of inevitable. I mean, any number of television series you could point to. It's just sad when it doesn't at least come back up a little bit or, you know, rebound a bit after, you know, you go from great to, okay, well, it's not as great. And then the sad thing with Dexter is, for my money at least, it's just kind of kept going downhill since then instead of rebounding up a little bit.
Right. I mean, the whole season 5 didn't work for me. I get what they were trying to do. It didn't work for me. As you mentioned, you know, the theme here on the show is a villain, and for Dexter to work, he needs a threatening villain. And after the Trinity Killer, there was never that. I don't think in any season was there ever a really threatening villain. I mean, season 5, there was this motivational speaker dude, Jordan something. I mean,
the people that had gang raped Julia Stiles.
Right. I mean, it's not a bad season per se. It just, I don't think it worked. I don't think people really were able to have any sort of emotional investment in Julia Stiles' character. But more than that, the villain himself was really not all that threatening. Not to Dexter, at least. I mean, he was this cowardly man who he didn't even rape girls. He watched as his accomplices raped girls. So it was, I mean, it was strong for sure, but as far as Dexter, the person himself, there was never a threat on him. So that didn't work. And then, you know, the Doomsday Killer in the season after that, I mean...
Well, the only
threat
the Doomsday Killer had was he kidnapped Harrison at the end, and that, for my money, watching that, it almost seemed like a desperate ploy, like, no, really, we mean business with this guy. See, look, he'll kidnap Dexter's
Exactly.
kid.
I mean, honestly, yes, I was never able to take that scene seriously. I mean, obviously, deep down inside, you knew, I mean, even if the Trinity Killer had taken Harrison, you knew Harrison wouldn't have died, but at least it's sort of like, you know, there's always doubt that, okay, what is going to happen? In that, as you said, because they had done such a poor job building up to that moment, when that moment had happened, it was A, kind of out of nowhere, and B, even when it did happen, it really failed to have the effect it should have, I think. So, the Doomsday Killer, I thought initially when the old man was, before we found out that, I mean, you do see it coming. If you've seen Fight Club and pretty much every other movie who's done that before, you do see it coming and you see the signs coming. But at least he seemed to be far more menacing than the younger man who actually does turn out to be the Doomsday Killer. The actor's name is actually completely eclipsed.
It was a real shame that they wound up going that direction with it, because the professor, the doctor that was supposed to be that was theoretically the bad guy, turns out to have a hallucination, a fractured part of his mind. He was such a better villain. Just the way he had menace and the way he would talk about it was just. For the record, Colin Hanks is the actor who played Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer.
Right, it was Colin.
But yeah, when they went that way, it was almost like, I'm trying to think of maybe a pro wrestling reference here. You've built up to like Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, but instead of Andre the Giant, out comes Big John Studd or Santino, as the case may be.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like when Vince McMahon turns out to be the evil force controlling the Undertaker.
It was me, Austin.
Except, yeah, exactly. And or like Rikishi being the dude who ran over Austin, for example. And sure, that promo was amazing. But instead of
Hornswoggle as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son.
Right. So and instead of like Steve Austin eventually squaring off with Triple H in that like 3 stages of Hell match, the whole Triple H just disappears, and the whole feud turns out to be with Rikishi. Like, imagine if right before that 3 stages of Hell match, Triple H doesn't show up, and Rikishi comes out, and he's like, "No, it was all me from the beginning. It was all my idea." It's hard to get, because you're just not gonna buy that. I mean, it's hard really to get behind that at all. So that completely kind of ruined the season, really. I mean, the whole season was a bit overly theatric and over the top, but I was fine with that. I mean, I was fine with the religion subplot and everything, but and I think I would have remembered it more.
Killer, so there's going to be more theatricality, just kind of by the nature of how that goes.
Absolutely. So I am willing to accept that. I'm willing to accept that he was able to paint Dexter's face on the devil in like 2 hours, when that would really take weeks. But hey, that's fine, honestly. But
we'll suspend a little disbelief here.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do that when you're watching Dexter. And I think Michael C. Hall himself said it. He said, I mean, this guy killed his brother in his brother's apartment with no police surveilling there or anything. I mean, he went into a crime scene and killed him without being seen. So it's not like the show doesn't realize its own. I don't want to call it plot holes, but yeah, sure. But the problem is, in that season, the moment you find out that the professor is not really the one behind all of that, you're like, as opposed to being shocked by this revelation or surprised or whatever your reaction might be, it's just so underwhelming. And when they had spent so much time focusing on the relation between the man who actually turns out to be the Doomsday Killer and the professor, well, yeah, obviously they're trying to show you how disturbed he is and everything, but still, it just didn't work. To me, that really didn't work, and it really took away from the Doomsday Killer himself. It took away from his menace. You just couldn't take him seriously at all. As opposed to realizing that, wait, he actually killed his sister. Then you're like, you know what I mean? Because when you think about it, he did end up killing his sister in a brutal way and posed her for the cops to see. So that should have actually left a much stronger impact, and yet it really didn't. As a villain, I feel the Doomsday Killer was one of the weakest in Dexter history.
Hands down, for me, one of the worst. I mean, like I said, Season 2, you had the duality of Dokes trying to catch him and his psychotic new girlfriend, Lila, and they kind of made up for each other's weaknesses as far as being kind of the opposing force to Dexter. And then, so, I mean, individually,
and
I think either of them might... No, go ahead.
Not to cut you off, but at least Dexter had great chemistry with Dokes.
Yeah, and Dokes was an interesting character in and of himself, because here is, I think, undoubtedly the most morally centered character the show has ever seen, and that here's the law, here's here's the good, here's the bad, here's where I stand. You had the most morally justifiable and morally good character, and not only did he feel the need to swear every other word, he was just an unlikable person as a general rule to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Anything you want to say about Season 7 of Dexter, since 8's going on right now? Is there anything you want to say about 7 before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, other than it was highly disappointing. The problem with Season 7 is that it's not that it diverted from a formula. I'm fine with that. It's that the man who was brought up to be, the man they spent the first, say, like 6 episodes building up as this huge menace to Dexter, turns out to be this gay Ukrainian, and I'm not knocking on the fact that it's not, him being gay doesn't make him any less menacing, but the revelation that he's this gay Ukrainian mobster who actually works with Dexter at the end, forgives him and dies, and sudden. I mean, it was just that whole season was chaotic. It didn't have a clear villain. I mean, you might consider Hannah McKay the villain, and Dexter fell for her, but their dynamic, I really hated their dynamic. I never thought they had much chemistry. That sex scene where he cuts her off his table, or like he unties her off his table, and they have sex instead of killing her. It was supposed to work much better than that, yet it was so wooden. I mean, I really didn't think anything worked in that season other than the fact that Jennifer Carpenter's character really, it shined, obviously. I mean, she's a terrific actress, but let's face it, that's not what would make Dexter great as a show.
You don't watch
so there was
the show
no
Dexter
clear...
to see. You don't watch the show Dexter
Deborah's
to
emotional
see
issue.
Deborah. Yeah.
Right, exactly. She's great when she's there. We want her to be there, but her alone is not gonna make up for a highly underwhelming and extremely flawed season. I mean, it's great that it makes sense that they would focus on his relationship with her, because that was the first season after she found out who her brother really is. So there was always, I mean, we knew there was going to be much drama and much dissension between them, and that's fine. But still, you needed to have something driving
when
Dexter.
the interaction between those two is the high point of your season, that's a very low bar.
Right. Because we're not seeing, we knew they had great chemistry from season one. The two of them as actors have great chemistry. So we're only seeing a different side of that chemistry, which is great, but ultimately is not going to make up for every other downfall in the season, and there were many. I mean, as I said, sticking with the villain theme, I can't name you who's the villain. Like the Victor, the Ukrainian dude, is it Hannah McKay? I mean, I guess she's the villain, but at the same time, that character never worked for me. I mean, she's easy on the eye, she's pretty to look at, but other than that, I found it when Dexter told her in the hospital that he loved her, I wanted to laugh because I found that to be a bit unbelievable. I mean, I couldn't take it seriously. And yeah, I get it. He fell in love with a femme fatale. Okay, I guess that's supposed to be, the main point of the season. But still, if she's supposed to be a threat to him, I mean, she was a threat to his relationship with his sister, maybe, but. And it was just chaotic. I mean, the reason why I'm really struggling to describe it is because the season makes you struggle while watching it.
Yeah, it's just, it's chaotic. It's kind of all over the place, and nothing really seems to make as much sense as it should.
Yeah,
all right,
and when you compare that to how tightly written the first 4 seasons were, it gets all the more obvious.
I'd even say 5 has some good writing in it. I mean, there are plenty of issues in season 5, don't get me wrong, but the writing in and of itself is still actually pretty good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually. Season 5, while not as good as the first 4 or not as entertaining, is at least it's solidly written from beginning to end. It's not all over the place. You know what's going on. You may not enjoy it, but at least you know what's going on. There aren't like 1,200 different things going on, none of which you actually care about.
Yeah. There's something to be said for coherency, folks. There are a whole podcast dedicated to movies and movie series that lack coherence and consistency. All right, that's going to be it for us. Samer, do you have anything you want to plug this week before we go off the air here?
I'll check out my column with Jeremy Lambert, just touching on multiple talking points in MMA at the moment. There wasn't a main theme, so we just touched on all the big things going on pre the announcement of BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar. Check out a specific podcast dedicated to that very fight with myself, Mark Radulich, and Larry Zonka, discussing our issues with this fight. And next week, just check out Jeremy and I's preview of John Jones against Alexander Gustafsson. And thanks for having me, Robert. I mean, it was. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a fight I'm looking forward to. We haven't had many this year, so that's. You
can break down how many inches of reach each guy has on each limb based on just the trailer.
I've seen that, actually. Yes. I mean, hey, the outcome might not be in doubt, but at least it's stylistically interesting.
Doesn't mean you can't have fun watching the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, that's what it's all about. And thanks for having me. anytime I get to discuss something that isn't MMA, it's actually quite refreshing. After how aggravating talking about Frankie Edgar versus BJ Penn was, this feels quite refreshing. Even talking about Dexter Season 7 isn't quite as irritating.
But come on, BJ Penn will be training guys again. He'll be coaching because he was so
Right,
great
and
in
he'll
Season 5.
He was awesome as a coach in Season 5.
Yeah, he threw that guy off
win
the
the
team. He
coach's
wouldn't. Yeah, and I can only imagine how many guys will be running rocks under a swimming pool. I mean, come on, that's great anaerobic training right there. He has to bring a giant rock and make him carry it underwater.
And then you need to leap out of that swimming pool the way BJ did. Remember that when he showed a video of himself leaping out of like a 3-foot swimming pool or something?
Yeah.
And that was supposed to show that he's in shape.
Crazy. Brief note also kind of on BJ Penn. Are you going to be surprised if he fails to make 145?
Yes, I will be, because he's going to run underwater not with one rock this time, but with 3. It's going to help with the weight cut. Actually, no, I wouldn't be. Honestly, with this fight, I really wouldn't be surprised at anything, with the exception of BJ Penn actually showing up on weight, showing up looking good at 145 and actually winning the fight. Yeah, that would surprise me. But the fight fell through because the fighter gets injured, because BJ Penn decides to say, screw it, I don't want to spend any time at the Tough House or coach any of these guys. I want to spend time in Hawaii with my daughter. Or if BJ Penn says, there's no possible way I'm making 145. Actually, I really wouldn't be surprised if, like, you know, they end up settling on like catchweight or lightweight and change the fight contract altogether. At this point, I'm preparing myself for anything. None of which I actually care about, though. That's the problem. There isn't a single scenario I would care about to make me care about this fight.
He'll be carrying 3 rocks underwater, and Mike Dolce will be screaming profanities at him from a boat above on the surface, because apparently he's reaching out to Mike Dolce.
Well, I would watch that.
That would be entertaining television. More entertaining than that season of Tough, I'm guessing. All right, Samer, it's absolutely great to have you on here. Anytime one of these comes up that you want to talk about, you are more than welcome here anytime. I like having you. I like having any of my guests, really, but I definitely like having you on here because you're a very analytical person, and I like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like the emotional responses as well, and getting Mark Radlich to go off on Bubbles was a highlight of the Wire podcast for me. But an analytical mind is also fun to have around, so I'm very grateful you were able to make this, to be here for this one.
Oh, thanks. What was this problem with Bubbles? I think Bubbles is awesome, but hey, if you don't want to revisit that, that's fine. But really, thanks for having me. I'm sure I'll be on again. And it was really a pleasure doing this.
Just as he doesn't care for Bubbles because in Mark's real life he works with a lot of addicts, so he knows. He's been around enough people Bubbles that, it's just another addict.
That's understandable.
Yeah. All right, for my brief plugs, I have Locked in the Guillotine up. Now, if you're listening to this live, it's on 411 Mania in the MMA zone. I have a bunch of reasons why I don't like the Frankie Edgar BJ Penn fight as well. Plus all of the news like Alistair Overeem facing off against Frank Mir. I have a video of what I think that fight will look like. It's a double knockout, folks, at the same time. Which this fight is the closest thing that we'll get to see to that being a possibility in the UFC ever. Any other fight, it happens on lower cards at times, guys knock each other out at the same time. If it's going to happen in the UFC, it'll be Alistair Overeem and Frank Mir. So I've got that.
If they touch gloves, it might happen. If they touch gloves, it really might happen. Just imagine them touching gloves and just going on contact.
Reminds me of that brief scene from the movie Sergeant Bilko when Bilko he arranges for one fighter to throw the fight, but the guy he gives the money to pay off the fighter takes it to the other guy who then thinks he's throwing the fight. So both fighters think they're trying to lose, and for like 5 rounds they don't do anything. Some guy hits a weak jab and both of them fall over in contact.
Oh, well, I wouldn't mind if this is how this fight ends. At least it would be entertaining. Yeah. And maybe we would never have to see either of them.
One can only hope. I will also be on the 411 Ground and Pound radio show this Sunday. It's every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's a good time, had by all. I think that's all I need to plug right now. And find the audio clip I used to get us out of here. There it is. So for Samer Khadi, the man who is one half of 2 people occupying the throne, for myself, I leave you with the words of Scarface once again. Thanks for listening, everybody, and remember to thank the bad guys because they make the brightness that goes on in your life that much brighter.
So say good night to the bad guys.